I stared at the crisp $50 bill in my trembling hands while the attorney's words echoed through the mahogany-paneled library. Everyone else had just received millions. Dad got $20 million. My brother Derek scored $15 million. Even my cousins Sarah and Marcus walked away with $10 million each. Uncle Robert, who barely spoke to Grandfather William for the past decade, inherited $5 million. Then came my turn. $50. That was it. The entire room fell silent as I examined the bill, noticing faint pencil marks along its edges. Dad's satisfied smirk burned into my memory. Derek couldn't contain his laughter. I said nothing, studying the strange markings my grandfather had quietly left on my inheritance. The silence in that mahogany library stretched forever. Attorney Harold Whitman cleared his throat uncomfortably, shuffling through his papers, as if searching for some mistake he might have overlooked. But there was no error. Grandfather William's final wishes were crystal clear, and I was holding the evidence of my apparent worthlessness in the form of a single $50 bill. Dad stood up first, his broad shoulders straightening with obvious satisfaction. Thomas had always been the golden son, the one who took over Grandfather's construction business and expanded it into 3 states. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled, his expensive suit immaculate, and his smile barely concealed behind a mask of false concern. "Well, Jackson," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I guess this teaches us something about earning respect and learning responsibility, doesn't it?" Derek burst into another fit of laughter, his lean frame shaking as he doubled over. My younger brother had always been the family troublemaker, but Grandfather had bailed him out of countless scrapes throughout the years. His dark hair was disheveled, his clothes wrinkled, and his bloodshot eyes suggested he'd been partying hard the night before. $50. Derek gasped between laughs. "You could maybe buy a nice dinner with that, or a tank of gas. Oh, man." "Jackson, what did you do to tick off the old man so bad?" My cousins Sarah and Marcus exchanged uncomfortable glances. Sarah, a petite blonde who worked as a marketing coordinator in Boston, fidgeted with her pearl necklace. Marcus, tall and athletic, with a perfectly trimmed beard, loosened his tie and avoided eye contact with me. They'd both been distant from the family for years, showing up only for major holidays and important events like this. "Maybe there's more to it," Sarah offered weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. Grandfather always had his reasons for everything. Uncle Robert, Dad's younger brother, stood quietly in the corner. His weathered face showed years of hard living and disappointment. He'd been the black sheep of the family after a series of failed business ventures and a messy divorce. His inheritance came as a complete shock to everyone, including himself. "Something's not right about this," Robert muttered, his gravelly voice cutting through the tension. "William loved that boy. Always did. This doesn't make sense." The attorney began gathering his documents, eager to escape the family drama. "The will is legally binding and has been properly executed according to Mr. Williams' wishes. If anyone has questions about the estate, they can contact my office during business hours." As everyone filed out of the library, I remained seated in the leather chair, studying the $50 bill under the warm glow of the antique lamp. The bill looked ordinary at first glance, but those faint pencil marks along the border definitely weren't random. They formed a pattern that seemed familiar, though I couldn't quite place where I'd seen it before. That evening, the family gathered for dinner at Dad's sprawling colonial house. The dining room buzzed with excited conversations about investment strategies and spending plans. Derek was already making calls to luxury car dealers. Sarah and Marcus discussed quitting their jobs and traveling through Europe. Dad talked about expanding the business empire and buying a vacation home in the Hamptons. I sat at the far end of the mahogany table, picking at my roast beef while enduring a steady stream of passive-aggressive comments and outright mockery. Every few minutes, someone would make another joke about my massive inheritance or suggest I frame the 50 as a participation trophy. "You know what, Jackson?" Derek said, waving his fork in my direction. Maybe grandfather was trying to teach you about starting from the bottom. $50 is perfect seed money for learning how real wealth is built. Everyone laughed except Uncle Robert, who kept shooting concerned glances in my direction. Emma, my girlfriend of 2 years, squeezed my hand under the table and whispered words of encouragement, but I could see the confusion in her green eyes. She'd met grandfather several times and witnessed his obvious affection for me. After dinner, I escaped to my childhood bedroom on the second floor. The space hadn't changed much since high school. Same navy blue walls, same twin bed with the plaid comforter, same desk where I'd struggled through algebra homework. I sat on the edge of the bed and held the $50 bill up to the bedside lamp. The pencil marks became clearer under direct light. They weren't random scratches or accidental marks. Someone had deliberately drawn a series of small lines and dots along the bill's border, creating what looked like a coded message. The pattern reminded me of something from my childhood, some game or puzzle grandfather used to play with me. Then it hit me like a lightning bolt. When I was 12 years old, grandfather taught me about creating hidden messages using simple marks and symbols. We'd spend hours in his study working on treasure hunts and codes that led to small prizes hidden around his estate. He called it our secret game and made me promise never to tell anyone else about it. The marks on the $50 bill matched the coding system he'd taught me all those years ago. My heart raced as I grabbed a pencil and paper from the desk drawer, carefully copying each mark and trying to remember the decoding method. The dots represented numbers, and the lines indicated direction or sequence. After 20 minutes of careful analysis, I decoded the message, Box 247, First National Tuesday, 3 p.m. Ask Patricia. My hands shook as I stared at the decoded words. Box 247 had to be a safe deposit box. First National was the bank where grandfather had maintained accounts for decades. Tuesday was tomorrow. 3 o'clock in the afternoon was a specific time. And Patricia must be Patricia Henley, the bank manager, who'd worked with grandfather for over 20 years. Emma knocked softly on the bedroom door. Jackson, are you okay in there? I quickly folded the paper and slipped it into my wallet alongside the $50 bill. Yeah, come in. I'm fine. She entered wearing her favorite green sweater that matched her eyes. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and her face showed genuine concern. Emma worked as a nurse at the local hospital, and her caring nature was one of the things I loved most about her. No, you're not fine, she said, sitting beside me on the bed. What happened today was horrible, and you don't have to pretend it doesn't hurt. I leaned against her shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of her lavender shampoo. I keep thinking about all the times grandfather and I spent together. The fishing trips, the chess games, the long conversations about life and business. I thought we had a special connection. Maybe I was wrong about everything. Emma wrapped her arms around me, her voice soft but firm. You weren't wrong, Jackson. Everyone who saw you two together could tell how much he cared about you. There has to be an explanation for this. Maybe the real answer will come tomorrow. Her words proved more prophetic than either of us could have imagined. Tuesday afternoon arrived with unseasonably warm October weather. Golden leaves drifted across the parking lot of First National Bank as I walked through the glass doors at exactly 3 o'clock. The lobby buzzed with typical afternoon activity. Customers waiting in line for tellers, loan officers conducting meetings in glass-walled offices, and the familiar hum of financial business. Patricia Henley emerged from her corner office the moment she spotted me. She was a dignified woman in her late 50s, with silver hair pulled into a professional bun and wire-rimmed glasses that reflected her sharp intelligence. Her navy blue suit was impeccable, and her warm smile had welcomed me during childhood visits with grandfather. Jackson, she exclaimed, hurrying across the marble floor. I was wondering when you'd come by. How are you holding up after yesterday? I've been better. I admitted pulling the $50 bill from my wallet. Patricia, I need to ask you about something strange. My grandfather left these marks on this bill, and I think they mean something important. Patricia's face went pale as she examined the pencil markings. Her hands trembled slightly as she traced the coded symbols with her finger. "Oh my goodness," she whispered. "He actually did it. Follow me, Jackson. We need privacy for this conversation." She led me through a maze of cubicles to her private office, closing the door firmly behind us. The office was decorated with family photos and community service awards reflecting Patricia's deep roots in our small town. She gestured for me to sit in one of the leather chairs facing her desk. "Jackson, what I'm about to tell you must remain absolutely confidential until you've had time to process everything," she began, her voice filled with urgency. "Your grandfather visited this bank every month for the past 2 years, making very specific arrangements. He was preparing for exactly this scenario." My heart pounded as Patricia unlocked a filing cabinet and retrieved a thick manila folder. "The marks on that $50 bill correspond to safe deposit box number 247. Your grandfather registered it under your name 2 years ago and only you can access it. He left very detailed instructions about what should happen when you arrived with that coded bill." Patricia handed me a small brass key and led me through the bank's security doors to the safe deposit box vault. Frank Torres, the security guard, was a stocky man in his 60s, with kind eyes and graying temples. He'd worked at the bank for over 30 years and remembered me from childhood visits. "Little Jackson." Frank grinned, though his expression quickly turned serious. "Your grandfather was here just 3 weeks ago checking on that box one last time. He seemed worried about something, kept looking over his shoulder like he expected trouble." We walked through rows of numbered boxes until we reached 247. Patricia inserted the bank's key while I used the brass key grandfather had left on the $50 bill. The mechanism clicked, and the narrow metal door swung open to reveal a small compartment filled with documents. Inside the box, I found 3 items that would change my life forever. The first was an antique silver key with intricate engravings that I didn't recognize. The second was a handwritten letter in grandfather's familiar script, sealed in a cream-colored envelope. The third was a small leather journal, bound with a red ribbon. "Take your time," Patricia said softly, guiding me to a private viewing room adjacent to the vault. "I'll wait outside and make sure you're not disturbed." My hands shook as I opened the letter first. Grandfather's handwriting was as precise and elegant as I remembered, though slightly shakier than in years past. "My dear Jackson, if you're reading this letter, then my worst fears about our family have been confirmed. I pray that you will forgive an old man for the pain this inheritance charade has caused you. The $50 was never meant to be your real inheritance. It was simply the first clue in a treasure hunt that will reveal the truth about everything. For the past 5 years, I have been conducting a private investigation into the character and actions of our family members. What I discovered broke my heart, but also opened my eyes to who could truly be trusted with our family's legacy. Your father has been systematically embezzling money from our construction business. Derek has accumulated massive gambling debts and has become involved with dangerous people through his cocaine addiction. Sarah and Marcus hired a lawyer 6 months ago to challenge my will before it was even written. Only you and Uncle Robert have shown genuine integrity and love without expecting anything in return. You visited me every Sunday afternoon, not because you wanted something, but because you enjoyed our conversations about life, literature, and philosophy. You helped me with household chores and listened to my stories about the old days when other grandchildren couldn't be bothered to call. The leather journal contains detailed evidence of everything I've discovered. The silver key opens a secret office in the basement of the estate, where you'll find documents that prove every allegation I've made. But Jackson, this is just the beginning. I have spent the last 2 years carefully transferring the majority of my wealth, approximately $800 million, into a complex trust structure that can only be accessed by someone who possesses both the intelligence and moral character to handle such responsibility properly. That person is you, my boy. The family you saw inherit millions yesterday will discover that their greed and betrayal have cost them everything. Meanwhile, you will inherit an empire built on honest work and genuine relationships, if you choose to accept the enormous responsibility that comes with it. Look for attorney James Patterson of Patterson and Associates downtown. He has been my secret legal counsel throughout this process and is waiting to meet with you. Tell him the code phrase Purple Martins return in spring, and he will know you are ready to learn the full truth. Stay strong, Jackson. Remember that character is measured not by what we receive, but by how we respond when faced with adversity. You have passed every test. All my love, Grandfather William. I sat in stunned silence reading the letter 3 times to make sure I understood correctly. $800 million, evidence of family crimes, a secret attorney, a hidden office in the estate basement. My entire world had shifted on its axis in the space of 5 minutes. The leather journal contained photocopied bank statements, legal documents, private investigator reports, and surveillance photographs. Page after page of evidence showing Dad's elaborate embezzlement scheme, Derek's drug transactions and gambling losses, and detailed correspondence between Sarah and Marcus, and their attorney discussing strategies to contest Grandfather's will. But the most shocking revelation came on the journal's final page, a medical report dated just 1 week ago. According to the document, Grandfather William's death had been faked. He was alive and hiding in protective custody because Derek's drug debts involved money laundering for organized crime figures who had threatened the entire family. Patricia knocked gently on the viewing room door. "Jackson, are you all right in there? You've been reading for over an hour?" I opened the door, my mind reeling with information. "Patricia, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Did my grandfather really die last week?" Patricia glanced around nervously before pulling the door shut again. "Jackson, there are things about this situation that go far beyond inheritance disputes. Your grandfather discovered that Derek owed money to some very dangerous people. People who don't accept excuses or payment plans. People who hurt families to send messages." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Your grandfather is a brilliant man who spent 78 years building relationships and learning how to protect the people he loves. That's all I can say right now. But if you follow the instructions in that letter, you'll learn everything you need to know." As I left the bank that afternoon with the silver key and journal hidden in my jacket, I realized that yesterday's humiliation had been the beginning of the most important journey of my life. The family members who had mocked my $50 inheritance were about to discover that their greed had cost them far more than money. It had cost them everything that truly mattered. The next morning, I drove to the estate with the silver key burning a hole in my pocket. The massive colonial house sat on 50 acres of rolling hills surrounded by oak trees that Grandfather had planted decades ago. As I pulled into the circular driveway, memories of childhood summers, spent exploring every corner of the property, flooded back. I entered through the kitchen door using the spare key Grandfather had given me years ago. The house felt different now, not just empty, but somehow expectant, as if it were waiting for secrets to be revealed. I made my way through the main floor to the basement stairs, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The basement had always been Grandfather's workshop and storage area, filled with tools, fishing equipment, and boxes of old photographs. But as I examined the walls carefully, I noticed something I'd never seen before. Behind a tall bookshelf filled with technical manuals, the wood paneling showed slight gaps that suggested a hidden entrance. The silver key fit perfectly into a nearly invisible lock hidden behind a fake book spine titled Advanced Concrete Engineering. The mechanism clicked softly, and the entire bookshelf swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a narrow corridor that led to a secret room. My grandfather's hidden office was remarkable in its thoroughness and organization. The windowless room contained a massive oak desk, filing cabinets, computer equipment, and walls covered with charts, photographs, and documents connected by red string like something from a detective movie. This was where William had spent the past 5 years investigating his own family. One wall was dedicated entirely to Dad's embezzlement scheme. Bank statements, forged signatures, altered invoices, and financial records showed how Thomas had systematically stolen over $4 million from the family construction business. The timeline began 8 years ago and continued right up until last month. Another section focused on Derek's drug addiction and gambling problems. Photographs showed my brother meeting with known dealers and entering illegal gambling establishments. Financial records revealed debts totaling $600,000 owed to increasingly dangerous creditors. Phone transcripts documented threats against family members if payments weren't made soon. The third wall contained information about Sarah and Marcus that shocked me to my core. Not only had they hired attorney David Richards to challenge grandfather's will, but they'd also been planning to have him declared mentally incompetent. Email printouts showed their strategy to claim that his advanced age made him susceptible to manipulation, thereby invalidating any inheritance arrangements that didn't favor them. But the most surprising discovery was a section dedicated to Uncle Robert that painted him in a completely different light. Rather than being the family failure, everyone believed Robert had been secretly helping grandfather investigate the others. His apparent failures and distance from the family had been a carefully constructed cover that allowed him to observe and report without suspicion. A phone rang in the corner of the room, startling me. I found an old rotary phone sitting on a small table beside stacks of legal documents. After the fourth ring, I answered hesitantly. "Jackson, this is James Patterson. I've been waiting for your call." The voice was warm but professional, belonging to a man who sounded like he was in his 60s. I gave him the code phrase from grandfather's letter, "Purple Martins return in spring." "Excellent," Patterson replied. "Can you come to my office this afternoon at 4 o'clock? We have a great deal to discuss, and time is becoming critical. There are developments regarding Derek's situation that require immediate attention." Patterson and Associates occupied the top floor of a downtown office building with panoramic views of our small city's historic district. James Patterson was a distinguished man with white hair, a perfectly trimmed beard, and the bearing of someone who'd spent decades handling complex legal matters. His office was filled with law books, diplomas, and photographs of him with various political and business leaders. "Your grandfather was one of the most brilliant strategists I've ever known," Patterson began as we settled into leather chairs beside a mahogany conference table. "What he accomplished in the past 2 years required incredible foresight, planning, and emotional strength." Patterson opened a thick briefcase and began laying out documents on the table. "Jackson, your grandfather didn't just hide $800 million from your family. He created an entirely new business empire that exists independently of everything they know about. Real estate holdings in 12 states, technology patents worth hundreds of millions, investment portfolios, private equity stakes in growing companies, and charitable foundations that will ensure his legacy continues for generations." The scope of grandfather's hidden wealth was staggering. Property deeds for commercial buildings in major cities, patent registrations for construction innovations he'd developed over decades, and stock certificates for companies I'd never heard of that were apparently worth fortunes. "How is this possible?" I asked, overwhelmed by the complexity of what I was seeing. "How did he transfer so much money without anyone noticing?" Patterson smiled. "Your grandfather spent 5 years moving assets slowly and carefully, using legal structures that made the transfers invisible to family members who were only paying attention to the obvious accounts. Shell companies, trusts, partnerships, and international investments that were perfectly legal but completely hidden. He handed me another folder filled with surveillance photographs. Your grandfather also hired the best private investigator in the state. Dana Mitchell is a former FBI agent who specializes in financial crimes and family investigation. She's been documenting your family's activities for 3 years, building an airtight case against everyone involved in illegal activities. The photographs were devastating. Clear images of Dad signing forged documents, Derek exchanging money for drugs, and Sarah and Marcus meeting with attorney Richards to plan their legal challenge. But the most disturbing photos showed Derek with men who looked like professional criminals, the kind of people who solved problems with violence. Jackson, there's something else you need to know, Patterson said gravely. Your grandfather isn't actually dead. His death was staged because Derek's drug debts put the entire family in danger from organized crime figures. William is currently in protective custody, waiting for law enforcement to build a case against the people who threatened him. My world tilted again. Where is he? Can I see him? Does he know what's been happening? He knows everything, son. In fact, he's been watching and waiting for you to follow the clues he left. Tomorrow morning, if you're ready, we can arrange for you to see him. But first, you need to understand the full scope of what's about to happen. Patterson pulled out a timeline showing the next week's events. Federal agents were preparing to arrest Dad for embezzlement and fraud. Derek would be charged with money laundering and drug trafficking. Sarah and Marcus faced conspiracy charges for their plot to have grandfather declared incompetent. And sometime in the next few days, grandfather would return from the dead to testify against all of them. The inheritance they received yesterday will be completely revoked, Patterson explained. Every penny will be returned to the estate, and additional civil lawsuits will recover the money your father stole from the business. Meanwhile, you'll inherit legitimate control of an empire worth nearly $1 billion. As I drove home that evening, my mind raced with the implications of everything I'd learned. The family members who had mocked my $50 inheritance were about to lose everything they thought they'd gained. More importantly, they were about to face justice for years of betrayal, theft, and conspiracy. But the most incredible revelation was that my grandfather, the man who'd taught me about integrity, hard work, and treating people with respect, was alive and had orchestrated the most elaborate plan in family history to ensure that good would triumph over greed. The $50 bill with its coded message had been just the beginning of the greatest treasure hunt of my life, and I was about to discover that the real treasure wasn't money. It was the vindication of everything I'd believed about character, justice, and family loyalty. 2 weeks passed after the will reading, and the cracks in my family's newfound fortune began showing in ways that would have been almost comical if they weren't so disturbing. I watched from a distance as each family member revealed their true nature through how they handled sudden wealth. Dad wasted no time making grand plans for his $20 million inheritance. He scheduled meetings with luxury real estate agents, purchased a brand new Bentley, and hired expensive consultants to explore business expansion opportunities. Thomas moved through those weeks with the swagger of a man who believed he'd finally received everything he deserved. At the family barbecue he hosted the second weekend after the will reading, Dad announced his intention to sell grandfather's smaller construction companies and invest the proceeds in a casino development project in Atlantic City. He'd already put down deposits on 3 commercial properties and was interviewing architects for his vision of a new American entertainment empire. Derek's behavior became increasingly erratic and dangerous. His $15 million inheritance disappeared into a blur of luxury cars, designer clothes, and nonstop partying. But the most concerning development was the parade of questionable characters who started appearing at family gatherings. Men with gold teeth and expensive watches who spoke in hushed tones and made everyone uncomfortable. During that same barbecue, I overheard Derek on his phone in Dad's study, his voice panicked and desperate. "I know I owe you guys, but I've got the money now. Just give me another week to liquidate some assets and we'll be square. I promise." The conversation ended with Derek throwing his phone against the wall and punching a hole in Dad's drywall. When family members asked what was wrong, he laughed it off and claimed he was just excited about his new investment opportunities. Sarah and Marcus quit their jobs within days of the will reading and immediately began spending like lottery winners who'd never learned financial discipline. Sarah purchased a convertible Mercedes and booked first-class trips to Paris and Rome. Marcus bought a boat he didn't know how to operate and started talking about opening a high-end restaurant, despite having zero experience in the food industry. But their most revealing behavior came during private conversations I accidentally overheard. While visiting Dad's house to collect some old belongings, I heard Sarah and Marcus talking in the kitchen about their frustration with the inheritance structure. "I can't access the full amount until all this probate nonsense is finished," Sarah complained. "My lawyer says it could take months, and I've already committed to buying that condo in Boston." Marcus nodded grimly. "Same here. I tried to get a loan against the inheritance, but the banks are being weird about it. Something about pending legal reviews or documentation issues. It's like they don't believe the money is really there." What they didn't realize was that Attorney Patterson had already filed court injunctions to freeze all inheritance distributions pending investigation of the estate. The family's spending spree was being financed by credit and loans that would soon become impossible to repay. Uncle Robert was the only family member whose behavior remained consistent and rational. He showed up to the barbecue driving the same pickup truck he'd owned for 5 years, wearing his usual jeans and work shirt. While others boasted about their plans and purchases, Robert quietly observed the chaos, with the expression of a man who'd seen too much of life to be surprised by anything. "Something's not adding up," Robert told me privately, as we stood on Dad's back patio watching Derek stumble through an animated conversation with 2 men in expensive suits. "Your grandfather was the smartest person I ever knew. This whole inheritance situation feels like one of his chess games, where you don't understand the strategy until the very end." I maintained my role as the disappointed victim, pretending to be depressed and defeated by the $50 inheritance. It was surprisingly easy to convince everyone that I was struggling emotionally, especially since I genuinely felt overwhelmed by the secrets I was carrying. During family dinners, I sat quietly while others discussed their financial plans, occasionally making comments about looking for a second job or considering selling my car to pay rent. The performance served multiple purposes. It kept suspicion away from me, it made family members feel superior and secure, and it positioned me to observe their true behavior without interference. Meanwhile, I was secretly meeting with Attorney Patterson twice a week to monitor developments in the federal investigation. The evidence against Dad was becoming overwhelming. Bank records showed systematic theft dating back 8 years, with increasingly sophisticated methods of hiding the stolen funds. Thomas had created fake vendor accounts, inflated project costs, and skimmed money from nearly every major contract the business had handled. Derek's situation was becoming genuinely dangerous. Federal agents had identified his creditors as members of a money laundering operation, with connections to organized crime. These weren't small-time local criminals. They were professionals who used violence to enforce compliance and had already made threats against family members. "Your brother owes $640,000 to people who don't negotiate," Agent Rebecca Torres explained during one of my confidential meetings with law enforcement. "They've given him until the end of this month to pay in full, and they've made it clear that family members are not off limits if he defaults." The most shocking development came when Patterson showed me transcribed phone conversations between Sarah Marcus and their attorney. Not only were they still planning to challenge the will, but they were also exploring options to have Derek declared a danger to himself and others, which would allow them to seize his inheritance for his own protection. "They're planning to eliminate Derek from the inheritance picture entirely," Patterson explained. "If they can prove he's mentally incapacitated due to drug use, they can petition the court to redistribute his $15 million between themselves." But the walls were closing in faster than any of them realized. Federal agents had been building cases against multiple family members, simultaneously coordinating with state authorities and financial regulators to ensure that no crimes went unpunished. The investigation had grown beyond simple embezzlement to include money laundering, tax evasion, fraud, and conspiracy charges. During the third week after the will reading, I received a phone call that changed everything. Patterson's voice was urgent and serious. "Jackson, it's time. Your grandfather is ready to return and the arrest will begin tomorrow morning. Are you prepared for what's about to happen?" As I hung up the phone, I realized that the family members who had spent weeks celebrating their good fortune and mocking my $50 inheritance were about to discover that their greed had cost them far more than money. They were about to lose their freedom, their reputations, and any claim to the family legacy they'd tried so hard to steal. The $50 bill that had seemed like such a cruel joke was about to reveal itself as the key to the most spectacular justice any of them could have imagined. And tomorrow, everything they thought they knew about Grandfather William and his final wishes would be turned completely upside down. The only question remaining was whether they would have the courage to face the consequences of their actions or if they would continue denying reality until the very end. The fourth week after the will reading began with a phone call that sent shockwaves through our family. Dad answered his cell phone during breakfast at a local diner, and within seconds, his face went completely white. Federal agents were at the construction company office with search warrants, seizing financial records and computer files. "This is impossible," Thomas kept repeating as he rushed to his car. "There must be some mistake. I've run that business perfectly legally for 15 years. But by noon, the mistakes Dad had made became glaringly obvious. FBI accountants had discovered discrepancies in project budgets that totaled millions of dollars. Construction contracts showed inflated material costs, payments to non-existent subcontractors, and systematic overcharging of clients that violated federal contracting regulations. Derek's situation deteriorated even faster than Dad's legal troubles. Tuesday morning, he showed up at my apartment with a black eye and split lip, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold a coffee cup. "Jackson, I need help," he pleaded, collapsing onto my couch. "These people I owe money to, they're not playing games anymore. They beat me up in broad daylight outside the bank. They said if I don't pay everything I owe by Friday, they're going to start hurting other family members." The terror in Derek's eyes was genuine and heartbreaking. Whatever mistakes he'd made with drugs and gambling, seeing him reduced to this desperate state made me realize how completely his addiction had destroyed his judgment and his life. "How much do you actually owe?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from Patterson's reports. $700,000, Derek whispered. "It started as maybe $50,000 in gambling debts, but the interest and penalties just kept adding up. Then I borrowed money from loan sharks to pay the original creditors, and everything spiraled out of control." What Derek didn't know was that federal agents had been monitoring his communications with the loan sharks for months. Every threatening phone call, every payment arrangement, every desperate plea for more time had been recorded as evidence in a money laundering investigation that would ultimately bring down a criminal organization spanning 3 states. That same afternoon, Sarah and Marcus received devastating news from their attorney. The probate court had frozen all inheritance distributions pending a comprehensive audit of the estate. Judge Helen Martinez ordered a complete financial review after irregularities were discovered in the will's execution and the estate's asset declarations. Sarah called me in a panic, her voice shrill with desperation. "Jackson, something terrible is happening. They won't let us access any of the inheritance money. My lawyer says there might be challenges to the entire will. I've already signed contracts on that condo in Boston. And if I can't close next week, I'll lose my down payment." Marcus faced similar problems with his restaurant investment and boat purchases. Credit companies were demanding immediate payment on loans he'd secured against his expected inheritance. His bank account was overdrawn, his credit cards were maxed out, and creditors were threatening legal action. "I don't understand how this happened," Marcus told me during an emergency family meeting at Dad's house. "The attorney said the will was legitimate. How can they just freeze everything after we've already been told we inherited millions?" Uncle Robert sat quietly in the corner of Dad's living room, observing the chaos with the expression of someone who'd been expecting this development all along. When the others demanded answers, he simply shrugged and said, "Maybe you should ask yourselves why William would have done things this way." The family meeting quickly devolved into accusations and blame. Dad insisted that federal agents were harassing him because of jealous competitors who wanted to damage his business. Derek alternated between paranoid conspiracy theories and desperate pleas for family members to lend him money. Sarah and Marcus accused everyone else of somehow sabotaging their inheritance claims. Meanwhile, I maintained my performance as the disappointed victim who was grateful to avoid the legal complications affecting everyone else. "Maybe getting $50 wasn't such a bad thing after all," I said, with carefully crafted bitterness. "At least nobody can freeze $50 or arrest me for possessing it." That evening, Patterson called with updates on the federal investigation that would have shocked my family members if they'd known what was coming. Grand juries had been convened in 3 different jurisdictions. Federal prosecutors were coordinating with state authorities to ensure maximum charges would be filed. And most importantly, the Justice Department had agreed to grandfather William's return from protective custody to testify against family members who had committed crimes. "Tomorrow morning, everything changes," Patterson explained. "Your grandfather will appear in federal court to provide evidence against your father's embezzlement scheme, your brother's money laundering activities, and your cousin's conspiracy charges. The inheritance distributions will be formally revoked, and criminal charges will be filed simultaneously." "What about Uncle Robert?" I asked, concerned about the one family member who had shown integrity throughout the ordeal. "Robert has been working with federal agents from the beginning," Patterson revealed. His apparent distance from the family and his financial struggles were part of an elaborate cover that allowed him to observe and report illegal activities. He'll be completely cleared of any wrongdoing and will actually receive a substantial reward for his cooperation with law enforcement. As I hung up the phone, I realized that tomorrow would bring the most dramatic reversal in family fortune that anyone could imagine. The relatives who had mocked my $50 inheritance and celebrated their own millions were about to discover that their greed and criminal behavior had cost them everything they'd hoped to gain. But more than that, they were about to learn that the grandfather they thought they'd buried was very much alive and had been orchestrating their downfall from behind the scenes. The man they'd betrayed, stolen from, and planned to manipulate was about to return from the dead to deliver justice with his own testimony. The $50 bill that had started this entire journey was about to prove its worth as evidence in the most spectacular family legal drama our small town had ever witnessed. And tomorrow, everyone would finally understand why grandfather William had chosen his inheritance distribution so carefully. Thursday morning arrived with unseasonably cool October air and crystal clear skies that seemed to promise dramatic revelations. I sat in the packed courtroom of the Millfield County Courthouse, watching federal agents, local reporters, family members, and curious townspeople fill every available seat. Judge Helen Martinez called the session to order at exactly 9 o'clock, and the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Dad sat at the defendant's table with his attorney Richard Blackwood, an expensive criminal lawyer from the state capitol. Thomas looked haggard and confused, his usual confident demeanor replaced by nervous energy and frequent whispered consultations with his legal counsel. The federal embezzlement charges against him carried potential penalties of 20 years in prison and millions in fines. Derek wasn't present in the courtroom because he'd been arrested Tuesday night after federal agents raided a warehouse where his drug associates were packaging cocaine for distribution. The money laundering charges against him included evidence of transactions totaling over $2 million. that had been processed through accounts connected to organized crime families in 3 different states. Sarah and Marcus sat together in the front row, both looking pale and frightened. Their attorney had advised them that conspiracy charges related to their plot to have grandfather declared mentally incompetent could result in significant prison sentences, especially since they'd attempted to defraud the estate of millions of dollars through legal manipulation. Uncle Robert sat beside me, and for the first time in years, he looked completely at peace. His role as an undercover informant for federal investigators had finally been revealed, vindicating his apparent failures and distance from the family. The rewards for his cooperation would include immunity from prosecution and a substantial financial payment for his assistance in exposing the family's criminal activities. Federal prosecutor Amanda Walsh stood to address the court, her voice clear and authoritative. "Your Honor, this case involves one of the most elaborate family fraud conspiracies we've prosecuted in this district. Over the past 5 years, family members systematically embezzled funds, engaged in money laundering, planned inheritance fraud, and conspired to manipulate an elderly family patriarch through illegal means." She gestured toward a table covered with boxes of evidence. "What makes this case particularly unusual is that the alleged victim of these crimes faked his own death in order to expose the full extent of his family's betrayal and protect himself from physical danger related to organized crime connections." Judge Martinez raised her eyebrows at this revelation. "Prosecutor Walsh, are you telling this court that William Jackson, the deceased individual whose will is central to these proceedings, is actually alive?" "Yes, Your Honor. Mr. William Jackson will testify today about the elaborate investigation he conducted into his own family's criminal activities, the evidence he gathered over a 5-year period, and the reasons he felt it necessary to stage his death in order to ensure justice would be served." The courtroom erupted in murmurs and gasps. Dad jumped to his feet, his face red with anger. "This is impossible. I was at my father's funeral. I saw his body. This is some kind of elaborate hoax designed to frame innocent people." Judge Martinez banged her gavel firmly. "Mr. Jackson, you will remain seated and allow your attorney to speak for you. Prosecutor Walsh, please call your first witness." The prosecution calls William Franklin Jackson. The courtroom doors opened and my grandfather walked in with steady, confident steps. At 78 years old, he looked exactly as I remembered. Silver hair, perfectly combed, wire-rimmed glasses reflecting his intelligent eyes, wearing the same style of navy suit he'd favored for decades. The only difference was a slight smile that suggested he was enjoying this moment of dramatic revelation. The gasps and exclamations from family members were audible throughout the courtroom. Dad's face went completely white, and he grabbed his attorney's arm so hard that Blackwood winced. Sarah started crying, and Marcus looked like he might faint. Even the court reporter stopped typing for several seconds, staring in amazement at the man everyone believed had been buried 2 weeks ago. Grandfather approached the witness stand with the dignity of someone who had spent years preparing for this moment. After being sworn in, he settled into the chair and looked directly at federal prosecutor Walsh. "Mr. Jackson," Walsh began, "please tell the court about the investigation you conducted into your family members' activities over the past 5 years. Grandfather's voice was strong and clear, carrying easily throughout the silent courtroom. "5 years ago, I began noticing discrepancies in my business accounts and unusual behavior from family members who seemed more interested in my money than in maintaining genuine relationships. I hired private investigator Dana Mitchell to conduct surveillance and financial analysis that would either confirm or refute my suspicions." He gestured toward thick folders of evidence on the prosecutor's table. "What Dana discovered exceeded my worst fears. My son Thomas had been systematically embezzling money from our family business for 8 years, using increasingly sophisticated methods to hide his theft. My grandson Derek had become involved with organized crime figures through his gambling and drug addictions. My other grandchildren, Sarah and Marcus, had hired an attorney to challenge my will and were planning to have me declared mentally incompetent. so they could seize control of my estate. Mr. Jackson, why did you decide to fake your death rather than simply confronting these family members directly? Grandfather's expression grew serious. Derek's drug debts put our entire family in physical danger. The people he owed money to were not ordinary creditors. They were professional criminals who used violence and intimidation to collect payments. FBI agents advised me that my life was genuinely at risk and that staging my death would be the safest way to gather evidence while protecting myself and other innocent family members. Prosecutor Walsh introduced dozens of pieces of evidence bank records, showing Dad's embezzlement surveillance photographs of Derek's drug transactions, recorded phone conversations between Sarah and Marcus, discussing their inheritance schemes, and documentation of the threats Grandfather had received from organized crime figures. Mr. Jackson, please tell the court about the inheritance structure you created and why you chose to leave your grandson Jackson only $50. For the first time since taking the witness stand, Grandfather smiled warmly. Jackson was the only family member who visited me regularly without wanting anything in return. He genuinely enjoyed our conversations about life, literature, and philosophy. He helped with household chores and listened to my stories because he cared about me as a person, not because he expected financial rewards. He looked directly at me, his eyes filled with pride and affection. The $50 contained a coded message that led Jackson on a treasure hunt to discover the truth about our family's situation. Meanwhile, I had spent 2 years transferring approximately $800 million into a trust structure that could only be accessed by someone with both the intelligence to solve my puzzles and the moral character to handle such responsibility properly. The courtroom fell completely silent as the implications of Grandfather's testimony became clear. The family members who had celebrated their multi-million-dollar inheritances were about to lose everything, while the grandson they had mocked for receiving $50 was actually inheriting nearly $1 billion. Dad's attorney requested a brief recess to confer with his client, but when court reconvened, Thomas had no choice but to admit his guilt in the face of overwhelming evidence. Derek, appearing via video link from jail, broke down completely and confessed to everything in hopes of receiving a lighter sentence. Sarah and Marcus pleaded guilty to conspiracy charges rather than face trial. Judge Martinez addressed each defendant individually, explaining the severity of their crimes and the impact on both the family and the community. Dad received 12 years in federal prison for embezzlement and fraud. Derek was sentenced to 8 years for money laundering and drug trafficking. Sarah and Marcus each received 3 years for conspiracy and attempted fraud. Mr. Jackson, Judge Martinez said to my grandfather, "This court commends you for your courage in exposing these crimes. Though we cannot officially endorse the methods you used to gather evidence. The inheritance distributions to the convicted defendants are hereby permanently revoked and all assets will be returned to your control." As the session ended, Grandfather approached me with tears in his eyes. "Jackson, my boy, I hope you can forgive an old man for putting you through this ordeal. But I had to know that the person inheriting our family's legacy would have the strength to handle adversity with dignity and grace." "There's nothing to forgive," I replied, hugging him tightly. "You taught me the most important lesson possible, that character is revealed not by what we receive, but by how we respond when faced with injustice." As we walked out of the courthouse together, I realized that the $50 bill with its coded message had led me to something far more valuable than money. It had led me to the truth about integrity, family loyalty, and the power of justice to triumph over greed and betrayal. 6 months after that unforgettable day in federal court, I stood in the renovated headquarters of Jackson Enterprises, looking out through floor-to-ceiling windows at our expanding business operations. The company that Grandfather had built over 5 decades was thriving under ethical leadership principles that prioritized employee welfare, community development, and sustainable business practices. The transformation had been remarkable in both scope and speed. Our construction company now employed 400 people across 3 states, offering competitive salaries, comprehensive health benefits, and profit-sharing programs that made every worker a stakeholder in our success. Employee satisfaction surveys consistently rated us among the best companies to work for in our region, and our project completion rates had improved by 30% since implementing transparent management practices. But the changes extended far beyond business operations. Grandfather and I had established the William Jackson Foundation dedicated to supporting financial literacy education, drug addiction treatment programs, and assistance for families affected by white-collar crime. The foundation's annual budget of $50 million was making measurable impacts in communities across the country. The Family Recovery Center, built on 20 acres adjacent to our main office, provided free counseling and rehabilitation services for people struggling with addiction and their families. The center's success stories included dozens of individuals who had overcome dependencies and rebuilt their lives with dignity and purpose. Every month, Grandfather and I visited the center to meet with patients and families who reminded us why our work mattered. Emma and I had married in a simple ceremony at Grandfather's estate, surrounded by genuine friends, loyal employees, and community members who had supported us throughout the legal ordeal. Our honeymoon in Ireland had provided time to process everything that had happened and plan for the future we wanted to build together. Emma's compassion and practical wisdom had become invaluable assets as we navigated the complexities of managing enormous wealth responsibly. Our home, a restored farmhouse on 50 acres bordering Grandfather's property, reflected our commitment to living simply despite our financial resources. We raised organic vegetables, kept chickens for fresh eggs, and maintained hiking trails that local schools used for environmental education programs. The contrast between our lifestyle and the extravagant spending that had characterized my family members' brief windfall was intentional and meaningful. Uncle Robert had become my most trusted business advisor and closest family confidant. His years of apparent failure had actually provided him with valuable insights into human nature, financial management, and the importance of maintaining perspective during both good times and bad. The reward money he'd received for cooperating with federal investigators had allowed him to purchase a small farm where he bred horses and mentored young people interested in agriculture. "You know what I learned from watching this family for 40 years?" Robert asked during one of our regular Saturday morning fishing trips. "Money doesn't change people. It just reveals who they really were all along." Your grandfather knew that, and he designed his final test accordingly. The fate of my family members served as a constant reminder of how quickly poor choices could destroy lives built over decades. Dad was serving his 12-year sentence at a minimum security federal prison in Pennsylvania, where he worked in the library and took college courses through a distance learning program. Our monthly phone conversations were strained, but gradually becoming more honest as he began accepting responsibility for his actions. Derek's journey was more complicated, but ultimately more hopeful. After serving 18 months in federal prison, he'd been transferred to a residential treatment program that specialized in addiction recovery for inmates. His letters showed genuine remorse and a growing understanding of how his drug use had destroyed his judgment and endangered everyone he claimed to love. We'd begun corresponding regularly, and I was cautiously optimistic about his prospects for rehabilitation. Sarah and Marcus had served their 3-year sentences and were rebuilding their lives with varying degrees of success. Sarah had returned to Boston, where she worked for a nonprofit organization helping families navigate financial crises. Her experience with legal troubles had given her genuine empathy for people facing similar challenges. Marcus had opened a small landscaping business in Colorado, focusing on sustainable gardening practices that reflected his newfound appreciation for honest work and environmental responsibility. The most remarkable transformation involved the organized crime figures who had threatened our family through Derek's debts. Federal investigators had used Derek's cooperation to build cases against money laundering operations in 3 states, resulting in dozens of arrests and the dismantling of criminal networks that had operated for years. The FBI estimated that Derek's information had prevented millions of dollars in illegal transactions and potentially saved lives by disrupting violent criminal enterprises. Grandfather's health had improved significantly since ending the stress of his secret investigation and fake death. At 79, he remained actively involved in business operations while spending increasing amounts of time on philanthropic projects and mentoring young entrepreneurs. His morning walks around the estate had become neighborhood fixtures as he stopped to chat with joggers, dog walkers, and children riding bicycles. The best part about this whole experience, Grandfather told me during our weekly chess games, is discovering that all those years of teaching you about character and integrity weren't wasted. You passed every test, even when you didn't know you were being tested. Our business success had created opportunities for community development that extended far beyond traditional construction projects. The Jackson Enterprises Scholarship Program provided full college funding for local students who demonstrated academic potential and community service commitment. The small business incubator housed in a renovated warehouse downtown offered resources and mentoring for aspiring entrepreneurs who needed guidance and capital to launch their ventures. Perhaps the most personally meaningful project was the restoration of the old mill building, where Grandfather had started his first construction company 60 years ago. We'd converted the space into a museum and educational center that taught local history while providing meeting rooms for community organizations. School groups regularly toured the facility to learn about entrepreneurship, family business legacy, and the importance of ethical decision-making. Emma's pregnancy had added another layer of joy and responsibility to our expanding life. As I watched her tend to our vegetable garden on warm spring mornings, I thought about the lessons I wanted to pass on to our children. The $50 bill that had started this entire journey now hung in a frame in our home office, serving as a daily reminder that the most valuable gifts often come disguised as disappointments. "What are you thinking about?" Emma asked, joining me on the front porch with 2 cups of coffee, and her characteristic smile that had sustained me through the darkest moments of family crisis. "I'm thinking about how Grandfather's test taught me the difference between inheriting money and inheriting wisdom," I replied, putting my arm around her shoulders. "The money is wonderful, but the wisdom about character and relationships is what will actually shape our children's lives." The evening sun cast golden light across our property as we sat together planning nursery designs and discussing names for the baby who would represent the next generation of our family legacy. In the distance, Grandfather was visible through his kitchen window, probably preparing his evening tea while reading one of the philosophy books that had always filled his personal library. The irony wasn't lost on me that the family members who had laughed at my $50 inheritance had ultimately received exactly what their character deserved, while I had inherited responsibilities and opportunities that would challenge me for the rest of my life. The money was significant, but the real treasure was the knowledge that integrity and patience would always triumph over greed and impatience. As stars began appearing in the darkening sky, I reflected on the profound life lesson embedded in Grandfather's elaborate plan. Sometimes what appears to be rejection is actually the beginning of the greatest gift you'll ever receive. The $50 bill hadn't been a dismissal. It had been an invitation to prove that I understood the difference between having wealth and being worthy of it. Our story had become a local legend that parents told their children about the importance of character and the dangers of greed. But for me, it remained a deeply personal reminder that the most valuable inheritance isn't money. It's the wisdom to handle whatever life gives you with dignity, compassion, and unwavering integrity. And every time I looked at that framed $50 bill, I remembered the moment when disappointment had transformed into the greatest adventure of my life, proving that sometimes the smallest gifts contain the largest treasures. As I finish sharing this story with all of you, I can't help but wonder, have you ever experienced a moment when something that seemed like a setback or disappointment actually turned out to be the beginning of something amazing. Sometimes life's greatest blessings come wrapped in packages that don't look like gifts at all. I'd love to hear about your own experiences with unexpected turns that led to positive outcomes. If this story resonated with you and reminded you that character matters more than circumstances, please hit that like button to let me know. Your support means everything to creators like me who want to share stories that inspire and encourage people to believe in the power of integrity and persistence. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to my channel for more stories about ordinary people who discover extraordinary strength when faced with life's challenges. Every subscription helps me continue bringing you narratives that celebrate the triumph of good values over temporary setbacks. Finally, please share this story with friends or family members who might need a reminder that justice still exists in this world, even when it takes time to reveal itself. Sometimes sharing the right story at the right moment can give someone the hope and encouragement they need to keep believing in themselves. Thank you for taking this journey with me, and I wish you the wisdom to recognize when life is testing your character and the strength to pass every test with honor and grace. Remember, the most valuable treasures are often hidden in the most unlikely places, waiting for people with enough patience and integrity to discover them.